The narrative commences, inviting listeners into a deliberate and serene exploration of ancient Greek myths, where the faint murmurs of long-forgotten voices patiently await rediscovery. These tales, having resonated through countless ages, possess a timeless quality, perfectly suited for quiet contemplation. One is encouraged to soften the ambient illumination, find comfort beneath a warm covering, and permit the day's clamor to gently recede into silence. The storyteller then suggests a further refinement of the atmosphere, perhaps dimming the surrounding lights and activating a fan to provide a subtle, consistent background hum. With this preparation, the journey begins. A tranquil descent into the majestic, mist-shrouded peaks of ancient Greece, a realm where ethereal nymphs once confided their secrets to the passing breezes. The imagination is transported to a mountainside in this venerable land, where the morning's ethereal veil still clings tenaciously to the towering pine trees, and the very air is redolent with the aromatic essence of wild herbs and the crisp freshness of dew. It was in this idyllic setting that Echo, a mountain nymph of unparalleled charm, resided, long before her essence was reduced to a mere vocal reverberation bouncing off the rugged canyon walls. In her prime, she was a creature of remarkable lightness, her delicate feet seeming to float above the earth, and her melodious voice possessed such an enchanting quality that it could coax birds from their hidden nests. Echo possessed a singular, irrepressible inclination for conversation, a talent that, paradoxically, often led her into considerable predicaments. Her loquacity was not harsh or grating, but rather a constant, delightful stream of sound. Her voice, indeed, was exceptionally beautiful, possessing a musicality reminiscent of clear spring water cascading over polished river stones. Yet, once Echo commenced her verbal expressions, she found herself entrapped by an almost insurmountable compulsion to continue speaking. One might envision her on any typical morning, comfortably settled upon a sun-warmed boulder, engaged in lively discourse with her fellow mountain nymphs. While her sisters might offer a concise observation or two regarding the day's meteorological conditions, or perhaps mention a particular shepherd whose pipe melodies were especially sweet, Echo would invariably launch into expansive, richly detailed narratives. She would meticulously describe every ephemeral cloud adorning the firmament, every vibrant blossom gracing the verdant meadow, and every intriguing pattern of light and shade cast by the venerable oak trees. Her companions, it must be noted, harbored no genuine objection to her ceaseless chatter. Indeed, Echo's elaborate stories were consistently captivating, interwoven with minute observations that seldom failed to elicit smiles. She possessed an extraordinary faculty for discerning nuances that others often overlooked. The delicate flutter of a butterfly's wings as it paused to preen, or the subtle chromatic shifts in sunlight as it filtered through various layers of foliage. However, there existed one formidable goddess who found Echo's incessant garrulity profoundly inconvenient. Hera, the august consort of Zeus, had cultivated a deep-seated suspicion of mountain nymphs, a vigilance born of bitter experience. Zeus, the king of the gods, was notoriously prone to clandestine excursions from the hallowed heights of Mount Olympus, seeking dalliances with various nymphs. Consequently, Hera had honed an exceptional ability for tracking his whereabouts, often arriving at secluded mountain groves or sylvan clearings, fully prepared to apprehend Zeus in the midst of his latest romantic entanglement. Yet Echo, utterly devoid of malicious intent, had unwittingly transformed into Zeus's most effective, if accidental, confederate. Whenever Hera made her formidable appearance, her demeanor stern and her purpose resolute, Echo would invariably greet her with unbridled cheerfulness. "O most radiant Hera!" she might exclaim. "What an exquisitely beautiful morning this is! Have you observed how the sunlight exquisitely illuminates the dew-kissed threads of that spiderweb? And do you hear that delightful avian melody? I believe it to be a thrush, although it might conceivably be a lark. Its song possesses a subtly different cadence from yesterday's dawn chorus." By the time Echo had concluded her enthusiastic and detailed observations concerning the morning's natural splendor, Zeus would have quietly and deftly made his escape, leaving Hera to offer a polite, albeit strained, smile to the incessantly chattering nymph, while her elusive quarry once again slipped from her grasp. This scenario was not an isolated incident. Rather, it recurred with sufficient frequency to ignite within Hera the suspicion that Echo's actions were deliberately orchestrated. The truth, however, was far simpler and more benign. Echo genuinely reveled in the act of conversation, and she was genuinely delighted by the presence of anyone, even an occasionally ill-tempered goddess, upon her beloved mountain. Nevertheless, Hera's patience had finally reached its absolute limit with what she perceived as a series of clever delays and conveniently timed diversions. One fateful morning, after Zeus had, yet again, vanished, while Echo was eloquently describing the fascinating patterns of morning shadows shifting across the valley, Hera turned to the still prattling nymph with a definitive resolution etched upon her countenance. "Echo," she pronounced, and the very timbre of her divine voice possessed an authority so profound that it compelled the mountain nymph to cease her incessant talking. "Since you appear to cherish words so profoundly, from this moment forward, you shall only be capable of articulating those words that others have first spoken to you." It was a curse articulated with the full, formidable weight of divine power, and its imposition settled upon Echo with the oppressive density of a heavy shroud. She parted her lips, intending to voice a protest, to articulate her innocence and explain that she harbored no ill will, that she simply delighted in the act of conversation. Yet no words emerged. She could only wait, listening intently, hoping for another to speak, so that she might then appropriate their utterances and reconfigure them into a semblance of her own response. Her sister nymphs initially failed to comprehend her plight. They called out to Echo, inquiring about her distress, asking why her countenance appeared so troubled, and Echo, in her cursed state, could only reflect their very questions back to them. What was wrong? Why did she look so distressed? But the ability to elucidate her profound misfortune was irrevocably denied to her. As days gradually transitioned into weeks, Echo painfully assimilated the restrictive parameters of her new existence. She discovered that she could seize the concluding words of another's speech and return them. However, she was rendered utterly incapable of initiating conversations, unable to impart her cherished observations about the ever-changing quality of light or the intriguing configurations of the clouds. The mountain, once vibrant with her ceaseless chatter, now felt eerily quieter, imbued with a profound sense of loneliness, despite her continued proximity to the very sisters she had always known. It was during this period of silent, arduous adaptation that Narcissus made his indelible appearance upon her mountain. He was a youth of perhaps 16 or 17 summers, possessing a visage of such striking perfection that it invariably compelled onlookers to pause and gaze in admiration. His hair, like spun gold, seemed to capture and reflect the very sunlight, and his eyes were the profound blue-green hue of deep mountain lakes. He moved through the ancient forest with an innate grace and an unwavering self-assurance, as if he were an intrinsic part of its untamed wilderness. Yet beneath this captivating beauty lay a profound coldness, an aloofness that rendered him utterly unapproachable. When other young individuals attempted to cultivate his friendship, he would regard them with a mild, almost imperceptible disdain, as if their very presence were beneath his notice. When they openly declared their admiration or professed their love, he would emit a laugh, not precisely cruel, but laced with a dismissiveness that left them feeling diminished and foolish. Echo, observing him from her elevated vantage point on the mountainside, experienced an emotion entirely new and unprecedented. It was not merely his exquisite physical beauty that captivated her, though he was undeniably handsome. It was rather the effortless confidence with which he navigated her beloved forest, the profound sense of belonging he exuded within the wild, untamed places she held dear. She trailed him cautiously, silently, grappling with the profound challenge of how she might possibly approach another when her own speech was confined to borrowed words. She watched him kneel by a pristine stream to quench his thirst, observed him pause to meticulously examine a particularly rare and unusual wildflower. He appeared utterly absorbed in his own contemplations, entirely content in his solitary company. Eventually, he perceived that he was being observed. "Who's there?" he called out, turning his gaze toward the dense thicket of trees where Echo had concealed herself. "There," Echo responded, her voice a mere reverberation, for those were the only words available to her. Narcissus's brow furrowed in a frown, and he scrutinized his surroundings with greater intensity. "Come out," he commanded. "Show yourself. Show yourself." Echo echoed in reply, stepping partially into view, yet maintaining a sufficient distance to prevent him from clearly discerning her form. This peculiar and frustrating exchange persisted for several minutes, with Narcissus's irritation steadily mounting and Echo's desperation intensifying with each passing moment. She yearned to explain her identity, to speak of the mountain's wonders, to share with him all the exquisite details she had observed during his passage through her forest. But her curse rendered her utterly incapable of anything beyond repeating his own words back to him. When she finally stepped fully into the clearing, revealing her entire form, Narcissus regarded her with the same cool, detached dismissal he had shown to every other admirer. She was undeniably beautiful, as mountain nymphs invariably were, yet he appeared entirely unmoved by her loveliness, utterly uninterested in her palpable admiration. "I have no time for such trivial games," he declared, and with that, he turned to depart. "Time for games, chicas," Echo repeated, her voice laced with desperation, her hand reaching out in a futile gesture toward him. But he was already in motion, walking away, abandoning her in the clearing with only his borrowed words and the searing ache of rejection. She watched him vanish amidst the trees, carrying with him the nascent stirrings of love she had ever known, utterly oblivious to the profound gift he was so carelessly spurning. From that day forward, Echo began an inexorable process of dissolution. Not abruptly, but gradually, like the morning mist delicately touched by the first rays of sunlight. Her sister nymphs observed with mounting concern as their beloved companion became increasingly translucent, spending her days perched upon sun-drenched rocks and precipitous cliffs, her gaze fixed upon the distant horizon. She was slowly transforming into the very embodiment of what profound grief and unexpressed longing can wrought upon a soul when deprived of the words to articulate its anguish. A voice without a corporeal form, an echo devoid of its original sound. In due course, all that remained of the vibrant nymph who had once filled the mountain with her cheerful, incessant chatter was her voice, condemned to eternally reiterate the final utterances of others. However, this is not, in fact, the complete narrative, for Narcissus continued his aimless peregrinations, persisting in his established pattern of cold, heartless rejection, never quite comprehending that the fundamental flaw lay not with those who sought his affection, but with his own profound inability to cherish anyone other than himself, and the vigilant gods, who meticulously observed such human and indeed superhuman foibles, were taking careful and deliberate note of his conduct. What, then, do you suppose transpires when an individual utterly incapable of reciprocal affection finally encounters their own perfect reflection? The day was growing progressively warmer, and Narcissus had been steadily ascending a steep incline through dense, ancient woodlands. His tunic, clinging uncomfortably to his back, was damp with perspiration, and his throat felt parched and raspy. When he discerned the faint, soothing sound of water ahead, not the tumultuous rush of a mountain stream, but the gentler, more tranquil murmur of water quietly lapping against smooth stones, a profound sense of relief washed over him. Narcissus had been walking for a considerable number of hours, his attention rarely directed to the precise path his feet were treading. This, indeed, was his customary manner of traversing the world. He moved through his surroundings, his focus entirely internalized, absorbed in his own intricate thoughts, admiring his own inherent grace, scarcely registering the abundant beauty that encompassed him, unless, of course, it somehow served to mirror his own exquisite form, lest it somehow mirrored his own inner turmoil. That profound inquiry into self-reflection propels us deeper into the labyrinthine wilderness, where the arboreal canopy grows densely, and solar rays pierce through in luminous golden shafts, conjuring an ethereal realm seemingly detached from the ordinary flow of time. Such natural springs were a ubiquitous feature of the Hellenic mountainous regions, continuously replenished by subterranean currents that maintain the water's pristine coolness, even amidst the sweltering zenith of summer. These sites were frequently revered as hallowed grounds, believed to be the dwelling places of sylvan nymphs or locations where wayfarers might deposit modest votive offerings to secure safe passage on their arduous journeys. The aqueous basin he chanced upon possessed a perfectly circular contour, as if meticulously sculpted by a colossal implement. It was nestled within a diminutive glade, where the surrounding trees formed an organic enclosure, their boughs extending towards one another overhead, akin to fingers on the verge of intertwining. The water's surface was so preternaturally placid, it resembled burnished bronze, flawlessly mirroring the cerulean sky and verdant foliage with absolute fidelity. Yet Narcissus harbored no contemplations of sacred precincts, mythical nymphs, or propitiatory gestures. His sole perception was of unblemished water, and for this, he experienced profound gratitude. He knelt by the periphery of the pool upon the smooth, weather-worn stones that encompassed it, fashioned his hands into a cup, and imbibed copiously. The liquid was invigoratingly frigid and delightfully sweet, precisely assuaging his body's profound thirst. Consequently, when Narcissus first beheld that visage in the tranquil pool, youthful and exquisitely comely, with golden tresses that ensnared the dappled sunlight and eyes the hue of profound sylvan depths, his initial conjecture was not, "Ah, that is I." Rather, his primary thought was, "Who is this captivating individual, and what is their presence doing within the water?" Now, one might assume Narcissus would instantly discern his own mirrored image. However, it is imperative to recall that this epoch predated the widespread availability of looking glasses. Individuals in ancient Greece might occasionally catch their likeness in highly polished bronze or silver, but such reflective surfaces were prohibitively costly and exceedingly rare. The vast majority of people navigated their entire existences with only a nebulous apprehension of their physical appearance, derived from verbal descriptions offered by others or fleeting glimpses in undisturbed water. It was only when he paused, drawing a restorative breath, that he truly perceived the countenance gazing back at him from the water's serene expanse. "Greetings," he softly uttered to the aqueous reflection. He subtly shifted his cranium, and the face within the water reciprocated the movement. He elevated his hand, and the corresponding hand in the liquid likewise ascended. For a fleeting instant, comprehension seemed imminent, yet the visage was so exquisitely beautiful, so flawlessly perfect, that he could scarcely credit it as his own. Instead, he persuaded himself that he was observing a water nymph, one of those ethereal entities rumored to inhabit the springs and pools scattered throughout the mountainous terrain. This fanciful notion, he reasoned, would account for the impeccable beauty, the enigmatic manifestation, and the manner in which the figure appeared to subsist just beneath the liquid plain. He extended his hand towards the water, intending to caress that flawless face, and his digits breached the surface, fragmenting the luminous image into concentric ripples. Frantically, he retracted his hand, patiently awaiting the water's quiescence for the resplendent visage to re-emerge. He offered a smile, and the reflection returned a similar radiant expression, causing his pulse to quicken. Never had he encountered anyone of such unparalleled beauty, such absolute perfection. In comparison to this enchanting being, every other individual who had ever professed affection for him seemed insipid and unremarkable. This, he concluded, was the veritable embodiment of true beauty. The lips within the reflection moved, seemingly whispering inaudible words, though no sound registered in his auditory perception. This phenomenon only fortified his conviction that he was beholding a reticent nymph, perhaps one capable of communicating solely through gesticulations. When the image solidified once more, he experienced such profound relief that he nearly chuckled aloud. "Fear not," he softly intoned. "I shall inflict no harm upon you." Unbeknownst to him, hours dissolved into the past. He assiduously attempted every conceivable method to establish rapport with the water nymph, to coax her from her aqueous domain and engage in proper discourse. He executed various hand gestures, murmured tender appellations, and even ventured a brief song, an act he had never before performed for any of the corporeal beings who had previously pursued his affections. The lips once again articulated, conveying silent utterances. The eyes gazed directly into his with an expression of such profound yearning, such consummate understanding, that he felt as though his very heart might rupture. As the sun traversed the firmament, casting shifting patterns of luminosity and shadow around the crystalline pool, Narcissus's desperation intensified. This, he finally apprehended, was love. This excruciating yearning, this pervasive sensation that nothing else in the world held significance save for proximate intimacy with this singular, flawless individual. This was precisely what all those other suitors had endeavored to articulate regarding their sentiments. Yet, each time he reached for her, his touch dispersed her into transient ripples. Each time he inclined to bestow a kiss, his lips met only the frigid embrace of the water. She was unmistakably present, responding to his every facial nuance with flawless comprehension. Nevertheless, she remained perpetually beyond his grasp, impossible to caress, impossible to embrace. However, comprehending the essence of love and being capable of its fulfillment proved to be vastly disparate realities. He found himself utterly unable to depart from the pool's edge. Each time he entertained the notion, he would cast his gaze upon that exquisite face and perceive what appeared to be an expression of sheer panic in those perfect eyes. She required his presence. Clearly, she was striving to convey something of profound import. Should he abandon her, he might never again locate her ethereal form. Days unfolded in this fashion. He partook of the pool's water only when compelled by an overwhelming thirst, though he always exercised meticulous caution to disturb the surface no more than absolutely essential. He slumbered fitfully, his head cradled on his forearms, yet invariably awoke to ascertain that his beloved still remained visible. The sun descended below the horizon, and still he knelt by the water's edge. His knees grew rigid from the unforgiving stones. His back ached from his perpetually bent posture, yet he could not compel himself to withdraw. In the moon's silvery luminescence, the face within the water appeared even more ethereal, more profoundly magical. The sylvan nymphs observed this peculiar vigil with mounting disquietude. They recognized the unmistakable hallmarks of a divine malediction. The consuming obsession, the progressive emaciation, the complete severance from all that had previously sustained life. Some among them whispered that it was a just retribution, recalling his habitual coldness, his casual cruelty towards those who had cherished him. Yet others felt a pang of commiseration. After all, he was now enduring precisely what he had inflicted upon others. The profound agony of loving someone utterly incapable of reciprocating that affection. The desperate craving for something that perpetually remained just beyond reach. Echo was counted among the silent observers, though she was now scarcely more than an attenuated voice, a mere whisper carried on the zephyr. When Narcissus addressed his reflection, she occasionally intercepted his utterances and returned them to him from the surrounding rocks and trees. "Exquisite," he might murmur. "And exquisite," the mountain would softly reverberate. "Why will you not emerge to me?" he would implore, and the echo would reiterate, "Come to me, come to me." Ultimately, he simply wasted away, much as Echo had before him. Some accounts posit that his corporeal form dissolved into the earth surrounding the pool, enriching the very soil. Other narratives suggest he underwent a complete metamorphosis, becoming something entirely novel, an entity capable of existing in both terrestrial and celestial realms, rooted in the earth yet aspiring towards the heavens. But as days inexorably transitioned into weeks, it became unequivocally clear that no such intimate encounter would ever transpire. Narcissus grew gaunt, his once golden hair now lank, his flawless skin pallid from insufficient sun exposure and nourishment. Still, he found himself utterly incapable of disengaging from the pool, unable to cease his fervent contemplation of the face that returned his gaze with such perfect, heart-wrenching comprehension. Perhaps he perceived those echoes and mistakenly interpreted them as his water nymph's attempts to communicate with him from her aquatic domain. Perhaps they instilled in him a glimmer of hope that she was indeed listening, that she cared, that someday she might discover a means to join him on solid ground. What verdant growth emerged from that hallowed spot beside the tranquil water, where a young man had succumbed to an infatuation with love itself? From that serene pool where the first blossoms unfurled, we can, if we attune our senses carefully, discern something profoundly intriguing: the intricate manner in which sound traverses the ancient world, conveying messages in ways the Hellenes comprehended far more astutely than we might conceivably anticipate. Imagine traversing the rugged terrain of ancient Greece on a pristine morning, and everywhere around you, disembodied voices seem to engage in a reciprocal dialogue. Not precisely human utterances, yet something remarkably akin. The reverberations of your footsteps upon the stony pathway return to you from the sheer cliff faces, amplified and multiplied. When you project a salutation to gauge the acoustic effect, your own spoken words hurtle back, sometimes with pristine clarity, sometimes fragmented into discrete syllables that almost sound like an entirely different dialect. For the ancient Greeks, these were not merely captivating acoustic phenomena. They were perceived as genuine dialogues with the unseen inhabitants of the landscape, profound communiques from the spirits believed to reside within the very rocks, trees, and mountain peaks. Every echo possessed its own narrative, and every narrative bore a distinct appellation. The very term echo itself originates from the nomenclature of our aforementioned mountain nymph. However, the Greeks possessed a rich lexicon of diverse terms to describe the myriad ways sound could propagate and return. There was antiphona, the resonant answering voice that emanated from temple walls during sacred religious observances. There was ketchus, the sound that appeared to descend from elevated positions, akin to celestial pronouncements from the very gods themselves. Greek architects, it is worth noting, possessed a more sophisticated understanding of these acoustic principles than one might initially presume. When they meticulously engineered their magnificent theaters, meticulously sculpted into hillsides in perfect semicircles, they were not merely constructing venues. They were crafting spaces where every faint whisper from the stage could effortlessly reach the uppermost tier of seating. Yet they were also concurrently creating environments where the very landscape itself became an integral component of the theatrical performance. Envision yourself seated within the venerable theater at Epidaurus on a balmy evening, observing a tragic drama unfold on the stage below. The actor portraying Oedipus lets out a piercing cry of profound anguish, and his voice ascends through the tiered stone seating, traverses the distant mountains, and returns to you subtly altered, softened, imbued with an ethereal mystery by the intervening distance and the ancient stone. For a fleeting moment, it sounds as if the gods themselves are interjecting commentary on the unfolding action, lending their own divine voices to the poignant human drama. The integration of these sonic occurrences into the human experience was far from fortuitous. The ancient Greeks harbored a profound conviction that reverberations served as conduits through which celestial entities communicated with humanity. When an individual's utterances were returned from a hallowed grove or the venerable walls of a temple, it was perceived as a direct divine affirmation of their presence, a sacred response to their fervent supplications. Shepherds, toiling amidst the rugged mountainous landscapes, cultivated unique bonds with these acoustic phenomena. They would address their flocks with specific vocalizations, lengthy and sustained notes, meticulously chosen for their ability to resonate effectively, which the craggy formations would dutifully capture and intensify. Over time, these pastoral guardians honed an exquisite skill, learning to interpret the topography acoustically, discerning which valleys would absorb their calls into silence, and which formidable cliffs would project them back with augmented vigor. Children raised within these secluded mountain communities swiftly apprehended that echoes possessed distinct characteristics, almost like individual personalities. The auditory signature emanating from the ancient olive grove differed markedly from the one reverberating from the marble quarry. Some echoes were remarkably swift and incisive, returning words with such surprising alacrity that they seemed to precede the completion of the original statement. Conversely, other echoes manifested as leisurely and contemplative, clinging to vocal fragments for several heartbeats before gently releasing them back into the ambient air. The reverberation originating from the sacred spring, a hallowed fount where Echo herself was reputed to reside, possessed a particularly distinctive temperament. Travelers frequently observed its tendency to dally over certain words, especially those pertaining to affection, yearning, and the poignant ache of misapprehension. On occasion, these sojourners recounted, this unique echo would isolate an individual term from a lengthier sentence and reiterate it on multiple occasions, as if to imply a profound, underscored significance. Artisans of sound and verse, musicians and poets alike, accorded particular consideration to these sonic characteristics. A bard, in the process of fashioning a fresh melody, would perform it across various settings, meticulously attending to how the echoes modified the cadence and import of his carefully chosen words. Some verses, which appeared uninspired when recited within the confines of an ordinary chamber, would gain vibrancy and profound resonance when intoned from a mountainside. The returning echoes would spontaneously engender melodic concordances and contrasting motifs, harmonies the composer had never previously conceived. The esteemed poet Pindar famously articulated his artistic hurdle, describing a sonic rivalry with reverberations, striving to craft lines that would sound even more exquisitely beautiful when they returned, metamorphosed by geological formations and spatial separation. He elucidated the challenge of composing for a dual listenership. The assembled mortal populace gathered around him, and the unseen ethereal entities who would intercept his utterances and return them transmuted. Religious ceremonies, with remarkable foresight, frequently and intentionally integrated these acoustic phenomena. Priests would station themselves strategically in specific locales where their intoned supplications would echo back from temple walls, fostering the perception of celestial beings actively participating in the sacred devotion. The faithful would hear their own vocalized rejoinders return to them, superimposed and amplified, thereby imbuing a modest assembly with the sonic grandeur of an immense chorus. During the profound Eleusinian rites, those esoteric spiritual observances that offered participants a fleeting vision of the afterlife, a significant component of the metamorphic encounter involved meticulously arranged auditory phenomena. Participants would perceive audible manifestations appearing to emanate from subterranean depths, celestial heights, and encompassing all cardinal points simultaneously. These carefully crafted echoes collectively created an otherworldly soundscape, which persuaded numerous individuals of their authentic communion with the deities. However, reverberations were not universally appreciated, and at times proved disadvantageous. Certain locales acquired renown for troublesome sonic characteristics. The echo at a particular intersection in close proximity to Athens was fabled to pervert utterances into their antithetical meanings, such that a benediction transformed into a malediction, and a cordial salutation morphed into a dire admonition. Consequently, travelers adopted the prudent practice of traversing such places mutely, rather than hazarding their pronouncements being inverted to their detriment. The bustling agora of Athens presented its own unique echo problems, with multitudes of merchants simultaneously proclaiming their merchandise. The cacophony would reverberate from the adjacent edifices and resound back as an unintelligible clamor. Customers, adapting to this auditory chaos, learned to conduct transactions through nonverbal cues as much as by oral bargaining, gesturing towards merchandise and raising digits to signify costs, rather than attempting to communicate above the overwhelming din. Conversely, the venerable library at Alexandria was ingeniously engineered to mitigate reverberations, specifically fashioning environments conducive to hushed scholarly discourse. Here, scholars could engage in whispered conversations without their discussions ricocheting from the partitions and disquieting fellow patrons. The astute architects employed finely woven hangings and distinctively contoured pillars, designed to attenuate auditory waves instead of deflecting them, thereby establishing serene enclaves of deep tranquility amidst an otherwise bustling urban sprawl. Greek philosophers, ever contemplative, were captivated by the profound philosophical ramifications of echoes. If a word uttered within an uninhabited dale reverberated back to an individual, had one, in essence, engaged in self-dialogue. Were echoes, perhaps, compelling evidence of the temporal continuum allowing prior moments to address current ones? Plato, in his profound treatises, wrote about echoes as shadows of sound, imperfect replicas of fundamental verity, akin to his renowned parable of captives observing illusory forms projected onto a cavernous surface. Aristotle, adopting a more empirical methodology, meticulously investigated the physical principles governing the propagation and reflection of sonic vibrations. Yet, even his rigorous empirical findings were imbued with the realization that echoes transcended mere auditory occurrences. They were an intrinsic part of the dynamic discourse between humanity and the terrestrial realm. As dusk descends upon the mountainous terrain, and one perceives oneself traversing those identical dales where Echo formerly engaged in joyful discourse with her kin, a curious phenomenon might be discerned. The echoes manifest distinct qualities during the crepuscular hours, appearing milder, somehow imbued with a heightened introspection. One's very treads reverberate as if in a hushed colloquy, and when one momentarily halts to attend, the ensuing stillness appears pregnant with expectant utterances. What profound revelations, one might ponder, might these quiescent vocalizations be poised to impart, were we but adept at their proper apprehension? Those expectant vocalizations pertain to entities intimately familiar to the Hellenes, not as remote legendary personages from distant fables, but rather as close cohabitants, an intrinsic component of quotidian existence, as tangible and immediate as the arboreal dwellings they occupied, and the aquatic conduits they safeguarded. Envision oneself awakening within a modest Grecian hamlet, precisely as the solar orb commences its illumination of the elevated ridges. One's diurnal cycle commences, much as it did throughout antiquity in Hellas, with a conscious recognition of the unseen fellowship cohabiting one's environment. Before one proceeds to draw sustenance from the communal spring, one might momentarily halt to pay deference to the resident naiad. Before one traverses the sylvan expanse of an oak coppice en route to agricultural plots, one would offer a courteous inclination of the head to the dryads who claim those arboreal giants as their abode. This practice was not precisely a matter of superstitious belief, although it might appear so to contemporary sensibilities. It bore a closer resemblance to decorum, the identical civility one would extend to mortal counterparts, broadened to encompass the ethereal beings who co-occupy one's natural surroundings. Acknowledging their vital role, the Oreads made their abodes amidst the mountainous heights, gracefully performing their ethereal dances upon lofty summits bathed in the nascent dawn's illumination. The Nereids resided within the oceanic expanse, traversing the waves astride swift cetaceans and often offering succor to mariners navigating perilous maritime passages. The Hamadryads were inextricably linked to particular arboreal specimens, their very essence bound to an oak, ash, or olive tree, such that should their designated tree perish, so too would their own existence cease. The Potamides found their dwelling places within flowing rivers, whilst Limnades claimed dominion over tranquil lacustrine bodies. Every category of nymph exhibited a unique disposition, distinct predilections, and characteristic modes of engagement with the mortal inhabitants who co-occupied her domain. The Oreads, those mountain-dwelling spirits, often displayed untamed and unconstrained temperaments, inclined more towards mischievous, albeit innocuous, jests than towards direct benevolent intervention. Conversely, the aquatic nymphs, encompassing naiads, nereids, potamides, and limnades, were typically more amenable to rendering assistance, yet concurrently possessed a more volatile disposition. Should one incur their displeasure, the consequences could manifest as desiccated water sources, preventing irrigation, or perpetually barren fishing hauls, leaving families in want. Respect, therefore, was paramount. A quintessential Hellenic agriculturist possessed as intimate a familiarity with the nymphs inhabiting his acreage as he did with his mortal compatriots. He was capable of divulging which specific fount harbored an especially munificent naiad, an entity who would guarantee an abundant aqueous supply, provided one presented her with intermittent tributes of blossoms or sweet pastries, maintaining a harmonious exchange. He was cognizant of the sylvan sanctuary guarded by dryads who favored morning solicitations over nocturnal ones, understanding their rhythms. Furthermore, he knew which elevated thoroughfare was overseen by an Oread, who found delight in the vocalizations of wayfarers as they proceeded on their journeys, perhaps even singing a tune to please her. Youngsters matured amidst narratives concerning indigenous nymphs, much as contemporary progeny might be raised on anecdotes about the household residing opposite. Such tales were woven into the fabric of their upbringing, imparting crucial lessons. Refrain from plucking blooms from the verdant expanse situated beyond the sacred edifice. A maternal figure might caution her offspring. For that particular locale is the dwelling place of the Antausai, who become considerably displeased when individuals encroach upon their floral domain. or conversely, a comforting directive. Should one become disoriented within the sylvan depths, locate a flowing waterway and trace its course. The potamides, guardians of the streams, will direct you back to your abode, provided your entreaty is delivered with appropriate deference. These were not ethereal entities extrapolated from antiquated legends or distant lore. They constituted an integral component of the societal fabric, possessing interconnections, predilections, and emotional states that fluctuated in accordance with the cyclical rhythms of the year. The dryad residing within the venerable oak sentinel at the village entrance, for instance, might exude a jovial and hospitable demeanor during the vernal period, coinciding with her trees' burgeoning foliage and the general resurgence of life. Yet she might assume a somber and wistful disposition in the autumnal season, as the arboreal canopy commenced its defoliation, mirroring the natural decline. Adolescents in particular cultivated individualized bonds with these sylvan and aquatic spirits, often seeking their guidance in practical matters. A young woman apprenticing in the art of textile creation might deposit modest tributes at a sanctified spot dedicated to the nymphs presiding over fiber arts, imploring their assistance in dexterously guiding her digits and enabling the production of exquisite fabric. Similarly, a nascent huntsman, venturing into the wilderness, might endeavor to secure the benevolence of the Oreds, entities who possessed an intimate knowledge of every animal track traversing the mountainous terrain and could thereby guarantee his successful return to his household laden with provisions for his kin. Marriage customs often wove nymphs into their very fabric in profoundly significant ways. Brides, on the eve of their nuptials, would undertake a pilgrimage to the local sacred spring, earnestly supplicating the resident naiad to bestow blessings of abundant fertility and enduring happiness upon their impending union. They would ritually immerse themselves in the nymph's life-giving waters, leaving behind heartfelt offerings of delicate jewelry or fragrant perfumes, and sometimes, in a deeply personal act of communion, spend the entire night before the wedding in quiet conversation with the spirit, confiding their most cherished hopes and anxieties concerning the path of married life ahead. Farmers meticulously structured their agricultural endeavors around observances dedicated to nymphs. Specific days were reverentially set aside for honoring the tree nymphs, known as dryads. During these hallowed periods, no pruning or harvesting was permitted, and the orchards themselves were adorned with vibrant ribbons and freshly gathered flowers as a mark of respect. Other days were devoted entirely to the water nymphs, when all the community's wells and springs were diligently cleaned and blessed with purification rites, and small, joyous festivals were spontaneously held near winding streams and flowing rivers, celebrating the spirits who sustained their vital water sources. The delineations between nymph territory and human domains were generally well established and meticulously respected. Everyone in the ancient world understood implicitly that certain ancient groves were inherently sacred, that particular springs were never to be defiled by pollution, and that specific mountain peaks served as the private, ethereal dancing grounds of the Oreds. Transgressing these hallowed boundaries was not merely an act of disrespect. It was fraught with palpable danger. A nymph whose cherished home was damaged or profaned possessed the power to inflict severe hardship and misfortune upon the offending humans, making their lives extraordinarily difficult. However, the relationship extended far beyond a mere avoidance of offense or fear of retribution. Nymphs could prove to be incredibly powerful and benevolent allies when accorded the proper reverence and respect. They possessed arcane knowledge, knowing precisely where the finest wild honey could be gathered, which specific plants held potent healing properties, and where streams flowed with the clearest, deepest waters. A hunter who had successfully cultivated the friendship of the local dryads might discover, to his astonishment, that deer paths seemed to miraculously materialize just when he needed them most, or that his arrows flew with unerring accuracy when he pursued game within their hallowed forest. Shepherds, by virtue of their close proximity to nature, forged particularly intimate relationships with the various nymphs whose territories their flocks grazed. They developed an astute ability to interpret the subtle signs that betrayed a nymph's prevailing mood. An unusually vibrant and active chorus of birdsong, for instance, might indicate that the dryads were feeling playful and joyous, while an unexpected, ethereal mist rising mysteriously from a stream could signal that the water nymphs were in a contemplative state and preferred not to be disturbed. Some shepherds even achieved renown for their exceptional ability to communicate directly with nymphs. They would be sought out and called upon when someone needed to negotiate for safe passage through particularly sacred territory, or when a community desperately needed to comprehend why their local spring had abruptly altered its flow. These revered men, and occasionally women, effectively served as informal diplomats, bridging the divide between the human and nymph communities. Seasonal festivals frequently revolved around elaborate nymph celebrations. Spring festivals, for example, honored the joyous return of the tree nymphs from their restorative winter slumber, with entire communities congregating in hallowed groves to sing melodic hymns, engage in spirited dances, and share communal feasts. Summer celebrations primarily focused on the water nymphs, featuring spirited swimming competitions and exhilarating boat races, all meticulously designed to express profound appreciation for the benevolent spirits who ensured the continuous flow of rivers and kept the community's wells abundantly full. Autumn ushered in more somber observances, acknowledging the inherent sadness of the dryads as their beloved trees prepared for winter dormancy. Communities would gather fallen leaves into ceremonial piles, decorating them with late-blooming flowers and flickering candles, creating poignant and beautiful displays that honored the nymphs' seasonal sacrifice and allowed their trees to enter their period of rest. Winter marked the quietest period for nymph-related activities, yet it was far from silent. People would continue to leave small, thoughtful gifts at the bases of sleeping trees, silently thanking the dryads for their protective guardianship during the vibrant growing season and gently imploring them to return safely and vigorously in the spring. Even the practical act of ice fishing was always preceded by careful and respectful negotiations with any naiads whose waters had frozen over, ensuring that the act of breaking through the ice would not be misconstrued as an aggressive or disrespectful intrusion. Even significant political and military decisions were made with careful consideration of nymph territories. When ancient cities meticulously planned the construction of new roads or vital aqueducts, they invariably consulted with local priests who specialized in nymph relations, ensuring that the proposed construction would not inadvertently damage important sacred groves or invaluable springs. Military commanders, when formulating their campaigns, would sometimes choose to strategically detour around known nymph habitats, understanding implicitly that the benevolent goodwill of local spirits could prove far more valuable in the long run than merely saving a single day's march. As one might settle in for sleep in this ancient world, listening to the gentle rustling of the wind in the trees just outside the window, there might arise the faint, ethereal sounds of soft laughter or perhaps a tender, melodic singing. The dryads, too, are settling in for their nightly repose, whispering secrets to one another about the day's events, sharing playful gossip about the humans they have observed, and quietly planning small acts of kindness for the coming dawn. One cannot help but ponder how profoundly different our own relationship with the natural world would be if we still held faith in such invisible neighbors, if we still took the time to acknowledge and honor the inherent spirits of every cherished place. That profound question about the spirits of place naturally leads us to contemplate the most hallowed sanctuaries in the ancient Greek world. Those tranquil pools where the earth's hidden, subterranean waters gently emerged into the warmth of sunlight, where the ephemeral boundary between the mortal and immortal realms grew thin, and where enigmatic voices from below the surface had perennially spoken to those discerning individuals who knew how to truly listen. Imagine standing beside a pristine spring nestled within a grove of venerable olive trees, somewhere amidst the rolling hills above Delphi. The crystal-clear water bubbles forth from deep underground, refreshingly cold, forming a small, serene pool before gracefully overflowing to create a winding stream that meanders down toward the verdant valley below. The sound is a gentle yet unwavering murmur, not the dramatic rush of a powerful waterfall, but the steady, patient, and ancient voice of water that has been speaking here for countless millennia. This particular spring, in its quiet majesty, has been considered sacred for a span of time longer than human memory can truly encompass. Even centuries before the magnificent temple dedicated to Apollo was constructed in the valley below, people journeyed here to drink its pure waters, to perform sacred ablutions, and most importantly, to listen to its ancient wisdom. The water possesses a subtle, distinctive mineral taste, a tangible hint of the deep earth it traversed to reach the sunlit surface. Local inhabitants recount tales of its potent healing properties, claiming it can assuage persistent headaches and calm troubled, worried minds. Yet, beyond its therapeutic attributes, they assert it can enable one to perceive profound insights, whispers of ancient wisdom, fleeting fragments of prophecy, and even echoes of celestial conversations between the gods themselves. It was understood that not everyone was privileged to hear these elusive voices, and even those who did were not granted this gift on every occasion. The spring, in its divine autonomy, spoke when it chose, and to whom it chose, its messages often so cryptic as to necessitate careful and astute interpretation. Springs of this mystical caliber existed throughout the vast Greek world, each possessing its own distinct character and renowned reputation. Some were celebrated specifically for their potent healing waters, while others were revered for their prophetic voices. The venerated spring at Dodona, for instance, whispered its oracles through the rustling oak leaves that gracefully overhung its waters, creating a unique sylvan language that the resident priests had meticulously learned to interpret. The springs at Lebediah, on the other hand, demanded elaborate purification rituals before they would deign to grant visions to those who dared to drink from their depths. The most renowned of all was undoubtedly the Castalian spring at Delphi, where the Pythia, Apollo's esteemed priestess, would ritually drink its waters before entering the temple to deliver her profound prophecies. The water from this particular spring was widely believed to inspire a form of divine madness, a temporary, sacred delirium that allowed a human voice to become a direct channel for divine communication. However, one did not need to be a celebrated priestess to experience the unique enchantment of sacred springs. Ordinary individuals, facing the mundane yet deeply personal problems of daily life, frequently sought solace and guidance there. A farmer burdened by anxieties about his crops, a mother consumed with concern for a sick child, or a young person grappling with the momentous decision between two divergent paths in life. All would come. They would sit patiently by the water's edge, sometimes for hours on end, awaiting the profound clarity that so often seemed to emerge from the ceaseless, murmuring sound of the flowing water. The accompanying ritual was typically uncomplicated. One would bring a modest offering, perhaps a few fragrant flowers, a dollop of golden honey, or a few drops of wine ceremonially poured onto the earth. The petitioner would then state their question aloud, or sometimes merely hold it silently, introspectively, within their mind. Then they would wait, listening not solely with their ears, but with whatever deeper part of their being was capable of discerning subtle, ethereal voices. Occasionally, the answer would manifest as an actual auditory voice, words seemingly rising directly from the water or whispering from the surrounding ancient trees. More frequently, however, it arrived as a gradual shift in understanding, a slow and profound clarification of thoughts that had previously been muddled and indistinct. The spring, in its wisdom, did not explicitly dictate what one should do, but rather, it served as a benevolent catalyst, helping one to hear their own intrinsic wisdom with far greater clarity. Travelers, in planning their arduous journeys, would often strategically include stops at these hallowed springs. A merchant embarking on a perilous voyage to a distant city might pause at a roadside spring to earnestly implore protection during his travels and ensure prosperous trade. A pilgrim undertaking a spiritual trek to a major temple would deliberately halt at smaller shrines along the way, gradually building a deeper, more profound relationship with the sacred landscape. Layer by spiritual layer, accumulating blessings and insights. Young people, standing at pivotal junctures in their lives and confronting major decisions, would undertake special pilgrimages to springs renowned for their guidance. A young woman grappling with the choice between various suitors might spend an entire night sleeping beside a spring sacred to Aphrodite, ardently hoping for dreams that would reveal which choice would ultimately bring her the most profound happiness. Similarly, a young man striving to decide whether to follow in his father's footsteps as a farmer or to seek his fortune in the bustling city might consult a spring dedicated to Hermes, the venerated god of travel, commerce, and new ventures, seeking divine counsel for his future path. Beyond their oracular and guiding properties, the springs also functioned as powerful places of healing, addressing both physical ailments and emotional distress. People would engage in sacred ablutions in the blessed waters, drink them as a potent elixir, and even carefully carry small amounts home in specially crafted vessels. The healing imparted was not necessarily dramatic or instantaneous. More often, it manifested as a gradual restoration of balance, a slow and gentle return to holistic health and complete wholeness, nurturing both body and spirit. The path to health and comprehensive well-being often involved seeking guidance from sacred springs, which were believed to possess restorative powers. Each spring fostered its unique community of dedicated attendees. An elderly woman, for instance, would faithfully visit every dawn to replenish her water jug and confide her anxieties to the resident naiad. A shepherd would regularly stop by each dusk on his journey homeward, sharing tidings from the mountainside and attentively awaiting counsel regarding his flock. A collective of youthful mothers convened weekly to immerse their infants in the hallowed waters and exchange experiences concerning the intricacies of raising offspring. These informal gatherings organically developed their distinct customs and interpretations. They possessed an intimate understanding of the optimal times of day for the spring to impart wisdom, the offerings most likely to be accepted, and the types of inquiries that yielded the clearest responses. This localized knowledge was meticulously transmitted across generations, cultivating a profound oral tradition surrounding each revered location. The capricious nature of the seasons profoundly influenced the disposition of the springs, mirroring their impact on all facets of the natural world. Water that effervesced joyfully during the warmth of summer might assume a pensive and sluggish demeanor during the chill of winter. Certain springs were rumored to be most prescient during specific lunar phases or on particular dates within the religious calendar. During epochs of profound crisis, such as armed conflicts, widespread pestilences, or catastrophic natural occurrences, these sacred springs transformed into pivotal centers for communal supplication and deliberation. People would congregate in unprecedented numbers, not merely seeking individual enlightenment, but a collective sagacity on how to navigate arduous periods. The pronouncements emanating from the springs frequently underscored the virtues of patience, resilience, and the indispensable necessity of preserving human connections, even when the world appeared to descend into pandemonium. Furthermore, the springs functioned as informal archives of communal memory. The naiads, who were believed to inhabit these waters, purportedly retained every event that transpired near their domain. Every utterance, every invocation, every momentous happening. Consulting a spring was not solely about acquiring novel insights. It was about accessing the accumulated wisdom of all individuals who had sought assistance there previously. Some springs garnered reputations for specialized modes of communication. The spring situated adjacent to a renowned pottery atelier was whispered to offer counsel on artistic methodologies. The spring nestled beside a vineyard provided judicious advice concerning viticulture. The spring, positioned at a confluence where 3 trade routes converged, became celebrated for its profound understanding of distant territories and exotic customs. As the centuries progressed and Greece successively experienced Roman dominion, followed by Christian influence, many of these revered springs retained their significance, even as their interpretations evolved. Christian recluses would erect modest chapels beside them, recognizing that these locales had perpetually served as porous boundaries between realms, irrespective of the appellations bestowed upon the divine presences residing within. Even in contemporary times, for those who possess the discernment to seek them out, some of these ancient springs continue their perennial flow, still frequented by individuals yearning for clarity and tranquility. The accompanying rituals may have diverged from their ancient forms. The nomenclature of the deities may have undergone transformation, yet the fundamental human imperative to repose beside flowing water and attentively receive wisdom has remained an immutable constant throughout the ages. As one takes their place beside this particular spring within the olive grove, listening to its delicate voice intermingling with the soughing of the wind through venerable foliage, one might discover their own thoughts attaining greater lucidity. their own inner voice becoming more readily discernible. The water persists in its patient colloquy with the terrestrial and celestial spheres, conveying messages between worlds, precisely as it has always done. In the deepening twilight, as the inaugural stars commence their appearance, reflected in the tranquil pools nestled between the springs, what profound inquiries would you entrust to these ancient receptive waters? There exists a blossom one might have observed in nascent spring gardens, characterized by its pristine white petals gracefully encircling a golden core, gently swaying in the zephyr. The Hellenes christened it Narcissus, and they held the conviction that it enshrined the reminiscence of a youthful man who dedicated his days to an activity we might deem rather unremarkable: perambulation. One can readily visualize him amidst the undulations outside an antique Greek metropolis, perhaps in proximity to Thespiae in Boeotia, where the matutinal mists enfold olive groves and the pathways meander languidly between low-lying stone barriers. His appellation was Narcissus, and with each dawn he would rouse himself prior to sunrise, don his uncomplicated sandals, and embark upon his accustomed circuits through the rural expanse. The act of walking itself was not extraordinary. Young Greek men frequently spent their mornings in this manner, traversing the landscape at a pace that permitted them to discern myriad details: the trajectory of morning shadows across terraced hillsides, the mutable quality of light as it filtered through disparate species of leaves, the vocalizations of avifauna when they presumed no human auditors were present. What distinguished Narcissus was the collective reaction of individuals upon encountering him. As one trails him on one of these excursions, it becomes evident that other people, adolescent women transporting water jars, shepherds guiding their flocks, elderly men seated in doorways, all momentarily halt their activities as he passes. This pause is not precipitated by any dramatic or ostentatious behavior on his part, but rather by an attribute more subtle and enigmatic. It might reside in the manner his hair captures the illumination, perhaps, or in the seemingly effortless and intrinsic fluidity of his movements. The Greeks possessed a term for this inherent quality. They designated it beauty, though their apprehension of it differed significantly from our contemporary understanding. For them, beauty was an attribute that compelled one to deliberate upon broader philosophical inquiries, upon concepts of harmony, upon the rationale for why certain elements in the cosmos appeared to coalesce flawlessly, whilst others felt ungainly or constrained. One morning, as Narcissus traversed a pathway that paralleled a diminutive stream, a young woman named Echo observed him from a distance. She had been gathering herbaceous flora in the cool embrace of the early morning, filling her receptacle with mint and oregano that flourished untamed along the water's edge. The judicious course of action would have been to proffer a salutation, perhaps inquire about the route ahead, or remark upon the agreeable meteorological conditions. Yet, Echo found herself hesitating. There was an intrinsic quality to Narcissus's progression through the landscape that instilled in her a desire to simply observe and listen, akin to the way one might pause to scrutinize a cervid that has yet to detect one's presence. She trailed at a discreet remove, not with the intention of intrusion, but rather impelled by a profound curiosity regarding the destinations of someone so utterly engrossed in the very act of ambulation itself. This trailing evolved into a recurrent pattern. Day after day, Echo found herself irresistibly drawn to scrutinize Narcissus from a respectful distance, She began to notice nuanced details, how he invariably selected paths that led near water, how he occasionally paused to contemplate his reflection in streams or pools, not out of egregious self-admiration, but with the identical gentle attentiveness he bestowed upon all other aspects of his surroundings. This prolonged gazing at his reflection struck one as somewhat peculiar, though not dramatically so. After all, in an era preceding the widespread availability of mirrors, pellucid water offered one of the scant opportunities for clear self-perception. And there is an intrinsically human inclination towards inquisitiveness regarding one's own visage, particularly when others react to it in ways that defy immediate comprehension. One can readily envision Narcissus kneeling beside the stream, his gaze fixed upon the countenance mirrored therein, perhaps pondering the same universal questions anyone might pose. Do I bear a resemblance to my progenitor? What do other individuals perceive when they behold me? Why do conversations occasionally cease upon my entrance into a chamber? The interlude by the water progressively extended each day. What commenced as a fleeting glance metamorphosed into several minutes of tranquil introspection. Narcissus began to carry diminutive portions of bread or fruit with him, partaking of his unpretentious breakfast while seated beside pools or streams, invariably in locations where the water was sufficiently placid to afford an unblemished reflection. There was an undeniable serenity associated with these matutinal repasts by the water. The illumination was subdued, the atmosphere was cool, and the world exuded an unhurried cadence. One can readily conjure the gentle auditory tapestry, water murmuring softly over stones, leaves rustling in the faint breeze, the distant cries of agriculturalists proceeding to their fields. However, a subtle transformation gradually occurred during these quiet moments. The glimpses at his reflection intensified in duration and focus. Narcissus commenced interacting with the image in the water, inclining his head to observe the reflection's corresponding movement, extending his hand to touch the surface, and witnessing the image dissolve and subsequently reform. It is not arduous to comprehend how this might transpire when one dedicates sufficient time to scrutinizing one's reflection in still water, particularly under the soft illumination of the early morning. The image can appear astonishingly animate and responsive. Move one's head, and it reciprocates the motion. Smile, and it immediately mirrors the expression. Extend a hand towards it, and it extends in return. Days elapsed, and Narcissus consecrated an increasing amount of time to the water's edge. His perambulations diminished in length, invariably culminating at the identical limpid pool where the reflection manifested with the greatest vividness and verisimilitude. He brought more provisions, then lingered throughout the morning, subsequently extending his stay into the afternoon. From her vantage point concealed amongst the arboreal growth, Echo observed this progressive alteration with escalating apprehension. She watched as Narcissus began to engage in discourse with his reflection, conducting conversations primarily characterized by protracted silences and gentle utterances. She witnessed him meticulously arrange blossoms by the pool's periphery, as if preparing votive offerings for an aquatic inhabitant. The daily regimen became increasingly centered upon these interactions with the reflected image. Narcissus awoke early, but instead of embarking on extensive walks, he proceeded directly to the pool. He brought breakfast, yet frequently neglected to consume it, too utterly engrossed in observing and conversing with the image within the water. One can readily observe how an individual, particularly one who dedicates considerable time to solitary contemplation and observation, might progressively blur the distinction between a mere reflection and tangible reality. The aquatic image responds with such immediate alacrity to every gesture, appearing so vividly present and deeply attentive that it begins to emulate genuine companionship. Echo, with a profound and inexpressible sorrow, witnesses this unfolding tragedy, understanding a predicament that defies easy explanation or simple remedy. She perceives Narcissus's physical decline as he spends entire days fixated by the pool, engaging in heartfelt discourse with the water about thoughts and emotions he has never before divulged to another soul. The ultimate demise, when it arrived, was characterized by a quiet, gradual fading rather than a sudden, dramatic conclusion. One particular morning, Echo reached her customary observation point to discover that Narcissus had not stirred from the poolside since the preceding day. He lay prostrate beside the tranquil water, his gaze still fixed upon his mirrored likeness. Yet his respiration was shallow, and his movements were strikingly sluggish. By the arrival of evening, his form had become as utterly motionless as the very surface of the pool. And precisely in the spot where he had passed countless mornings, Echo discerned a novel sight. A diminutive white blossom, adorned with a golden heart, emerging directly at the water's edge, where the soil remained perpetually damp, though never fully saturated. The ancient Greeks held a conviction that some narratives do not so much conclude as they undergo a profound transformation into something distinct, yet intrinsically linked. The exquisite flower that materialized there unfurled its petals each spring, invariably situated near a body of water, and perpetually inclined ever so slightly towards its own watery reflection. They bestowed upon it the appellation Narcissus, cultivating it within their verdant gardens as a poignant reminder of profound inquiries that resist facile resolutions. What does it truly signify to comprehend one's innermost self? How do we judiciously balance an acute self-awareness with a considerate understanding of others? And why do some of life's most pivotal insights stem from observing the unassuming, daily choices individuals make when they believe their actions are unwatched? Shifting our focus to observation from a distance, let us metaphorically settle into the venerable stone seating of an antique Greek theater and contemplate the sonic phenomenon of a voice traversing these gracefully curved amphitheaters, reverberating off polished marble surfaces and returning to us, subtly altered, yet unmistakably familiar. Imagine oneself seated within the hallowed confines of the theater of Dionysus in Athens on a balmy afternoon in the late spring, perhaps around 450 BCE. The sun hangs sufficiently high to cast crisp, well-defined shadows from the tiered stone benches, and one can detect the aromatic essence of wild herbs, thyme and rosemary, flourishing within the crevices of the marble blocks, releasing their fragrant oils as the day's warmth intensifies. The theater currently stands deserted between dramatic presentations, affording the opportunity to discern the peculiar behavior of one's own voice within this acoustically engineered expanse. Utter any phrase, any sound, and heed how the vocalization journeys downward to the circular stage area, ricochets from the solid stone backdrop, and then promptly returns a moment later. Its timbre is noticeably softer, yet its identity remains perfectly distinguishable. This remarkable acoustic phenomenon captivated the Hellenes, and they meticulously integrated it into their conceptual framework for understanding the mechanics of storytelling. the intricate processes of memory, and the enduring quality of certain voices that seem to persist in specific locales long after their originators had fallen silent. They personified this returning vocalization as Echo, conceiving of her as a being who had once possessed the uninhibited capacity for speech, but was subsequently condemned to merely reiterate the utterances of others. The genesis of Echo's own narrative unfolds not within the structured confines of a theater, but amidst the untamed hills and dense forests, where auditory phenomena exhibit even more enigmatic characteristics. Should one have ever raised their voice in a sprawling mountain valley, or projected a shout across the tranquil expanse of a lake, they would comprehend how their vocalizations can rebound from multiple directions, occasionally overlapping with their own source, thereby generating fleeting instances where one appears to be engaged in a dialogue with the very landscape itself. Echo, in her primordial form, was a mountain nymph, one of those ethereal, mythical entities that the Greeks envisioned inhabiting the wild, remote reaches of their world, entrusted with the subtle custodianship of nature's minor enigmas. These included such wonders as why particular springs maintained an unending flow, why certain arboreal species congregated in perfectly arranged groves, or why the wind sometimes bore sounds from astonishingly distant origins. However, Echo possessed a singular aptitude that set her apart from her fellow nymphs. She exhibited an extraordinary prowess in the art of conversation, not merely in the act of speaking, but in cultivating that engaging, utterly delightful form of dialogue that causes the passage of time to become entirely imperceptible. She possessed the talent to spin intricate narratives that seamlessly built upon one another, artfully interweaving rich details and perceptive observations that rendered even the most familiar sagas feel novel and astonishing. This exceptional conversational gift attracted the notice of Hera, the venerable consort of Zeus, though certainly not in a manner that pleased the formidable goddess. Indeed, Zeus harbored a persistent inclination for vanishing from the celestial heights of Mount Olympus for undisclosed escapades, and whenever Hera embarked upon a search for him, she frequently encountered Echo, who was invariably prepared with elaborate, thoroughly entertaining anecdotes concerning any conceivable topic, save for the actual whereabouts of Zeus. Envision these recurring interactions. Hera's arrival at a secluded mountain grove, clearly on a quest for someone, and Echo's graceful emergence from among the verdant trees, offering a cheerful salutation before immediately launching into captivating observations about the indigenous fauna or meticulously detailed accounts of shifts in meteorological patterns, or even profound philosophical inquiries concerning the fundamental nature of temporal existence and recollection. These conversations were genuinely captivating. Echo possessed an innate talent for unearthing compelling perspectives on mundane subjects, yet their consistent effect was to impede Hera's investigative efforts just long enough for Zeus to conclude whatever clandestine adventure had drawn him to the mortal realm and to subsequently return to Olympus via an alternate route. After this distinct pattern of deception recurred several times, Hera ultimately comprehended the true nature of the situation. Rather than simply inflicting a dramatic and severe penalty upon Echo, the sagacious goddess elected a consequence that precisely mirrored the transgression. Since Echo had exploited her formidable conversational acumen to obstruct authentic communication, she would henceforth be divested entirely of the capacity to initiate speech. From that pivotal day forward, Echo could only reiterate the words spoken by others, and specifically, only the concluding few words of their utterances. Her voice retained its inherent beauty and clarity, yet she was no longer able to commence dialogues, narrate stories, or articulate her own thoughts directly. This profound transformation fundamentally altered Echo's engagement with the world. Instead of occupying the focal point of social gatherings, effortlessly drawing individuals into lively discourse, she became a being who listened with meticulous attention and discovered profound significance within the fragmented remnants of speech that returned to her. When the Greek poets and playwrights chronicled this myth, they were simultaneously delving into an essential truth regarding the functioning of language within the context of performance. In their theatrical venues, performers donned masks designed to amplify their voices, and the architectural design itself was meticulously engineered to project speech with crystalline clarity to the most distant seating areas. However, the sound also inevitably rebounded and returned, thereby forging intricate layers of meaning. A tragic actor delivering a powerful monologue on the theme of sorrow might perceive his own words reverberating back from the unyielding stone seats, and both the performer and the appreciative audience would experience that auditory return as a form of profound commentary, as if the theater itself were responding to and reflecting upon the intense emotions being expressed. The astute poets recognized that an echo is never an exact replication. When sound is reflected back to an individual, its journey invariably alters it. It becomes softer, slightly delayed, and at times fragmented. These subtle modifications possess the capacity to imbue familiar expressions with a novel quality, or to append layers of significance that were not immediately discernible when the words were initially uttered. Within the rich tapestry of Greek poetry, Echo evolved into a symbolic figure embodying this transformative potency of repetition. When the renowned poet Sappho penned verses about the complexities of love, she occasionally employed echo as a metaphor for the way emotions reverberate through the corridors of memory. How a beloved's words unexpectedly resurface, changed by the passage of time and the weight of emotion, yet still undeniably recognizable. The pastoral poets, who composed verses celebrating the lives of shepherds and the tranquility of rural existence, frequently incorporated Echo as a character who engaged with solitary herdsmen in the serene mountain valleys. In these lyrical compositions, the dialogue between a shepherd and Echo became an eloquent means of exploring themes of solitude and companionship, illustrating how conversing with oneself or with the natural landscape can sometimes furnish a distinct kind of solace and mental clarity that direct interaction with other human beings does not always provide. One can readily envision these poetic shepherds dedicating protracted days to their solitary flocks, vocalizing inquiries or observations, and then attentively listening to the resultant sound of their words upon their return. The phrase, "Is anyone there?" transforms into the lingering query, "Anyone there?" "I think it might rain," is distilled into the succinct, "Might rain." "I wonder if she remembers me," becomes the poignant, "Remembers me." The echo frequently appears to isolate the most crucial essence of what was articulated, stripping away any hesitations and qualifications to unveil the fundamental concern or underlying hope. In this profound manner, engaging in conversation with echo evolves into a gentle process of self-discovery, a unique pathway to apprehending one's own thoughts with enhanced clarity. Greek theater directors possessed a keen understanding of this psychological dimension of echo and skillfully integrated it into their dramatic staging. Pivotal speeches were occasionally delivered from positions specifically chosen for their natural acoustics, which would generate the most pronounced echo effect, ensuring that key words would literally reverberate to underscore the central themes. When Sophocles sought to emphasize a character's profound isolation, he might strategically place the actor so that their words would resound with striking prominence, thereby forging the powerful impression that they were truly alone, save for the poignant dialogue with their own reflected voice. Similarly, when Euripides wished to convey that a character was tormented by past decisions, he could employ the echo to make certain words return with an unsettling insistence, haunting the character and the audience alike. In words return insistently. However, the portrayal of echo in Greek poetry was not invariably tinged with sorrow or solitude. Within the realm of comedic plays, the interplay with echo could assume a vivacious and ingenious character. A theatrical figure might meticulously craft their utterances, arranging phrases in such a manner that echo's reverberating repetition would conjure forth clever wordplay or multifaceted interpretations, thus transforming a perceived constraint into an instrument of sharp intellect. Lyric poets, on the other hand, discovered in echo a profound vehicle for exploring the very mechanics of poetic artistry itself, how the most exquisite verses perpetually revisit readers, unveiling novel layers of meaning with each successive encounter, and how familiar lexicon can astonish and captivate us anew when meticulously reconfigured into fresh textual arrangements or articulated within distinct contextual frameworks. As one reposes in the hushed confines of this ancient, unpeopled amphitheater, hearkening to the resonant cadence of one's own voice as it rebounds from the time-worn stones, an intriguing contemplation might arise. What would it truly entail to apprehend the world predominantly through such a modality of reflected communication? What profound insights might one garner concerning the intricacies of language if the sole avenue for expression were through iterative repetition and responsive echoes? Perhaps such an existence would cultivate an heightened discernment for the precise lexical choices made by others, fostering a more acute awareness of the inherent rhythm and melodic qualities embedded within quotidian discourse. Moreover, it is conceivable that one might cultivate a more profound appreciation for the sanctity of silence, for those interstitial lacunae between spoken words, where meanings possess the inherent fluidity to transmute and proliferate. The Hellenes steadfastly maintained the conviction that echo continued to reside in locales where vocalizations carried and returned with remarkable clarity. Within the grand theaters and the secluded mountain valleys, reverberating across tranquil lakes and permeating the depths of ancient forests, they conceptualized her not as a figure burdened by tragedy, but rather as an entity who had assimilated an alternative mode of engaging in the perpetual colloquy between humankind and the surrounding natural world. And perhaps it is precisely for this reason that Greek poetry continues to resonate within the fabric of our contemporary literary and intellectual endeavors. It elucidates why these venerable voices persistently return to us across the expanse of centuries, undeniably transformed by their protracted odyssey through the corridors of time, yet still unmistakably recognizable, perpetually proffering fresh interpretations each time we lend a sufficiently attentive ear to their enduring wisdom. Envision oneself traversing a humble dirt pathway that meanders gracefully amidst verdant olive groves somewhere within the picturesque region of Attica, perhaps a leisurely hour's stroll from the bustling metropolis of Athens. It is the nascent hours of morning, and a delicate mist is just commencing its ethereal ascent from the valley depths. The venerable olive trees stand as timeless sentinels, their gnarled trunks intricately twisted and deeply scarred by the relentless passage of centuries and the vagaries of weather, their silver-green foliage shimmering with a captivating luminescence in the gentle, caressing breeze. Transitioning from the echoing voices that once filled ancient theaters, let us embark upon a deliberate perambulation into the rustic Greek countryside, pondering why the inhabitants of this land, thousands of years in the past, firmly believed that the very terrain possessed the capacity for articulation and, more significantly, that its voice merited profound attention. As one proceeds along this contemplative journey, a keen observer would discern how the landscape itself appears to possess an intrinsic rhythm. The judicious spacing between individual trees meticulously adheres to the natural undulations of the hillside. The sturdy stone walls, delineating separate groves, are meticulously constructed from rocks unequivocally sourced from this specific local soil. Even the pathway beneath one's feet gracefully curves to follow the most facile route through the topography, its surface worn smooth by the countless generations of individuals who intuitively comprehended how to move harmoniously with the land rather than in opposition to its inherent characteristics. They observed, for instance, that particular locales seem to inherently stimulate specific categories of contemplation or emotion. A secluded copse of venerable oak trees might consistently imbue visitors with a pensive and earnest disposition, whereas a sun-drenched meadow situated proximate to a natural spring might reliably elevate one's spirits and foster a more sanguine outlook concerning any challenges they might be confronting. For the ancient Greeks who trod these identical pathways, this profound consonance between human endeavor and natural patterns intimated something of paramount significance. The landscape was an active, sentient participant in the unfolding tapestry of life within its embrace, rather than merely a passive backdrop or a utilitarian resource to be exploited. These occurrences, the Greeks firmly believed, were not arbitrary happenstance, but rather compelling evidence that diverse places possess distinct individual personalities, unique modalities of communicating with the human beings who spent time within their confines. A verdant hillside richly carpeted in wild herbs might articulate its messages through the fragrant exhalations it released when the sun's warmth enveloped the plants, transmitting vital information regarding the prevailing weather conditions, the current season, and the inherent health of the soil beneath. The Greeks meticulously cultivated elaborate traditions centered around the art of hearkening to these profound landscape communications. Prior to making momentous decisions concerning optimal locations for planting crops, excavating wells, or constructing dwellings, they would dedicate significant periods of time within potential sites, assiduously attending to subtle indicators and inherent patterns. For Greek agriculturalists and pastoralists, these intricate plant communities were akin to ongoing dialogues, with each species responding synergistically to the provisions offered by the others. The aromatic rosemary, for example, contributed to safeguarding other vulnerable plants from specific insect infestations, while the deep-rooted fennel drew subterranean water closer to the surface, rendering it accessible to smaller, more delicate flora. The very landscape, in essence, was imparting invaluable lessons concerning cooperation and reciprocal sustenance. If one possessed the discerning capacity to observe and interpret the myriad phenomena encountered, a similar profound experience could be personally realized. As one continues this contemplative promenade, it becomes imperative to notice the nuanced transformation in the aroma of the olive leaves as the morning light intensifies its embrace. One must pay meticulous attention to the manner in which certain synergistic combinations of flora appear to flourish in harmonious proximity. The robust wild rosemary often thrives near the ancient stone walls, while the delicate fennel seeks out the moist depressions where rainwater naturally gathers after a refreshing downpour, and minuscule orchids gracefully emerge from the dappled shadows cast by the more imposing trees. They vigilantly monitored the intricate movements of water, how it traversed and permeated the land across the varying seasons. They assiduously observed which specific areas attracted a vibrant array of birds and beneficial insects, and conversely, which regions seemed to deter detrimental pests. They discerned how the intrinsic quality of light underwent transformations throughout the day in different locales, and how the prevailing wind patterns subtly shifted in accordance with the undulating terrain. This diligent and meticulous observation ultimately led them to the profound conviction that the land itself was actively conveying invaluable information, knowledge that could judiciously guide human decision-making processes. A particular slope that retained its verdant hue for an extended duration into the arid season was, in essence, communicating vital intelligence regarding subterranean water sources. An area where wild medicinal plants thrived with exceptional vigor was implicitly suggesting its suitability as a potential site for healing endeavors. Greek mythology formalized these astute observations into captivating narratives populated by nymphs and nature spirits, entities believed to inhabit specific localities and capable of communicating with human beings who approached them with appropriate reverence. However, these were not merely whimsical fables. They represented sophisticated methodologies for encoding practical wisdom pertaining to how one might live sustainably within particular ecosystems. When an individual approached a sacred grove seeking sagacious counsel regarding the optimal timing for planting or harvesting, the attending priests possessed the acumen to offer guidance predicated upon subtle alterations in the tree's behavior, the precise moment of leaf emergence, the characteristic patterns of acorn production, and the nuanced manner in which the branches swayed in response to varying wind patterns, themselves reflective of broader climatic shifts. The venerable oak groves consecrated to Zeus, for instance, were typically situated in regions where the trees attained exceptional size and enjoyed remarkable longevity, often positioned in close proximity to reliable sources of water. The priests tasked with interpreting the profound messages emanating from these sacred groves were invariably individuals who had dedicated years to assiduously observing how the trees responded to prevailing weather patterns, cyclical seasonal transformations, and other pertinent environmental factors. Similarly, the hallowed springs where supplicants converged to receive prophetic utterances were judiciously selected for locations where the water's flow, its pellucidity, its temperature, or its mineral composition exhibited variations that correlated meaningfully with weather conditions, seasonal cycles, or other natural phenomena. The priestesses entrusted with interpreting these profound messages were highly skilled observers who possessed a deep understanding of how to decipher environmental indicators. The Greeks firmly believed that this particular genre of sustained, patient observation could lead to profound insights that were simply not attainable through alternative modes of learning. The unwavering rhythm of natural processes, the gradual metamorphoses in light and shadow, the subtle shifts in wind direction, and the intricate ways in which plants and animals responded to these changes could collectively serve as a profound form of meditation, a practice that clarified thought processes and facilitated the resolution of internal conflicts. However, the Greek conviction in the communicative capacity of landscapes transcended mere practical applications. They also maintained the profound belief that the land could impart more abstract forms of wisdom, profound insights concerning how to live a virtuous life, how to judiciously resolve conflicts, and how to comprehend one's intrinsic place within the grander, overarching patterns of existence. Imagine dedicating an entire afternoon to sitting quietly in a single spot, perhaps perched on a hillside commanding a panoramic view of a valley, simply observing how the scene subtly transforms as the light shifts and the day inexorably progresses. One might discern how the interplay of shadows reveals distinct facets of the terrain at different junctures, or how the very colors of the landscape undergo a captivating metamorphosis as the sun traverses the expansive sky. This deeply ingrained belief system fostered a mode of living that was exceptionally attuned to environmental subtleties. Individuals learned to discern when the behavior of birds or insects portended impending changes in weather patterns. They cultivated a profound sensitivity to the myriad ways in which their own physical and emotional well-being was influenced by factors such as atmospheric pressure, ambient humidity, and the seasonal variations in light intensity. They perpetuated narratives about individuals who received momentous insights while spending extended periods immersed in natural settings, not through dramatic supernatural interventions, but rather through the gradual, intuitive understanding that emerged from aligning their own intrinsic rhythms with the slower, more steadfast cadences of the natural world. A person grappling with a perplexing decision might dedicate several days to traversing the identical route through a specific landscape, meticulously attending to how their thoughts and emotions transformed in response to different places and varying times of day. The guidance they ultimately received emerged through this profound process of observation and introspection, yet they unequivocally understood it as a direct communication emanating from the landscape itself. As evening gracefully descends and one retraces their steps along the familiar olive grove path, one might discover oneself noticing aspects previously overlooked during the morning's walk. How the light filtering through the leaves creates entirely new patterns. How the evening air carries distinct and novel scents, and how the birds' calls have subtly altered as they prepare for the approaching nightfall. As they prepare for nightfall. Greek architectural principles and the thoughtful planning of their urban centers profoundly manifested this inherent understanding of the land's communicative power. Structures were meticulously positioned to harness the most advantageous air currents and the shifting patterns of natural illumination. Public forums and gathering places were strategically situated in locales where the inherent acoustic properties and sweeping visual vistas naturally amplified the various communal activities that transpired within them. Gardens, far from being solely utilitarian, were conceived as sacred spaces where individuals could perpetuate their profound dialogues with the natural realm. The deliberate arrangement of botanical elements, winding pathways, and tranquil water features was meticulously orchestrated to to foster moments of quiet contemplation and keen observation, faculties which the ancient Greeks firmly believed were conduits to deeper wisdom and profound insight. To the Hellenic mind, these subtle variations in the environment would not have been merely pleasing aesthetic differences, but rather the continuous, eloquent discourse of the landscape itself, patiently unfolding for anyone willing to listen with an open heart and observe with meticulous care. And perhaps within this venerable practice of perceiving the world around us as an intelligent interlocutor, rather than a mere picturesque backdrop to our human dramas, lies a profound lesson for contemporary society. What deeper truths might we uncover? What subtle nuances might we discern if we approached our routine peregrinations and outdoor sojourns as invaluable opportunities to attune ourselves to the messages the landscape might be endeavoring to convey about the cyclical rhythms of the seasons, the delicate vitality of the local ecosystem, or indeed the fundamental patterns that intricately connect all forms of life? It was in such a state of patient, enduring attention that Hera, the queen of the gods, spent countless days meticulously observing the mortal world unfurling beneath her, a scrutiny born of boundless time and an insatiable desire to comprehend the true mechanisms of existence. She was not simply the revered spouse of Zeus, but a formidable goddess in her own right, intrinsically linked with the sacred protection of families and the unwavering preservation of societal order and established decorum. As our reflections turn to the interplay between physical environments and the myriad voices that inhabit them, let us now revisit that pivotal juncture when Echo's extraordinary conversational prowess captured the discerning attention of the divine powers, and in doing so, consider the profound revelations the narrative offers concerning the intricate bonds between effective communication, unvarnished truth, and unwavering loyalty. Imagine yourself standing upon a resplendent marble terrace high atop Mount Olympus, gazing down upon the vast expanse of the mortal world, which lies spread out below like an exquisitely detailed cartographic representation. From this exalted altitude, one possesses the unique ability to discern overarching patterns that remain entirely imperceptible. From ground level, the serpentine paths of rivers that intricately link disparate geographical regions, the imposing majesty of mountain ranges that naturally delineate territorial boundaries, and the discernible clusters of human habitation that invariably gravitate towards vital resources, such as life-giving springs and fertile, verdant valleys. Zeus, in stark contrast, cultivated a distinctly different relationship with the mortal sphere. Where Hera maintained a steadfast, distant observation, Zeus exhibited a pronounced preference for direct, personal intervention. He would frequently undergo remarkable transformations, assuming various guises: the powerful form of a bull, the elegant silhouette of a swan, or even a dazzling shower of golden light, and descend to engage directly with mortals, particularly mortal women. From her elevated vantage point, Hera possessed the keen insight to perceive overarching behavioral trends and societal dynamics that the individuals involved often failed to recognize within their own immediate experiences. She keenly noted the flourishing vitality of successful marriages and the subtle indicators of those that were faltering. She meticulously observed the diverse strategies communities employed to resolve disputes and the joyous rituals through which they celebrated their collective triumphs. With particular intensity, she focused on matters of allegiance and fidelity, perhaps owing to the perpetual challenges and profound betrayals inherent in her own divine marriage. These frequent terrestrial expeditions invariably ignited a persistent undercurrent of tension between the celestial couple. Zeus, for his part, perceived these forays as entirely natural expressions of his boundless curiosity and inherent vitality. Hera, conversely, interpreted them as blatant transgressions against their sacred marital vows, and as potentially destabilizing forces threatening the very social order she tirelessly strove to uphold. The core of their disagreement was not merely a personal grievance, but a profound philosophical chasm, a fundamental divergence in their understanding of the inherent responsibilities that accompany immense power and exalted position. Echo, a nymph of the wild, found herself unwittingly ensnared in the intricate web of this divine marital dynamic, though it is likely that she initially remained oblivious to the far-reaching implications of her actions. Her dwelling lay within the untamed wildernesses where Zeus frequently chose to embark upon his clandestine adventures, and she possessed an innately gregarious nature, coupled with a strong protective instinct towards the community of nymphs and mortals who shared those verdant spaces. Envision these recurring encounters. Hera, arriving at a secluded forest grove, her demeanor radiating the focused intensity of a skilled tracker diligently following a faint trail, and Echo, gracefully emerging from the verdant foliage, offering a warm, immediate greeting and an instant, captivating fascination with whatever topic Hera might wish to explore. Are you seeking someone in particular? How utterly intriguing. You know, I was just contemplating the fascinating ways we locate individuals and whether our attraction to certain places is primarily driven by the prospect of who might be found there, or if our deepest draw is truly towards the inherent essence of the places themselves. When Hera would materialize in these sylvan settings, clearly embarked upon a search for Zeus, Echo's initial impulse was undoubtedly one of simple, genuine hospitality. Here was a visitor who appeared distressed or preoccupied, and Echo, endowed with exceptional conversational gifts, was naturally inclined to offer both engaging diversion and soothing comfort. It was entirely in her nature to draw Hera into the kind of enthralling, discursive dialogue that might alleviate her mood and help her achieve a more relaxed state of mind. Yet, from Hera's increasingly suspicious vantage point, these ostensibly delightful conversations began to exhibit a troubling, recurrent pattern. Invariably, each time she endeavored to trace Zeus's whereabouts, she would encounter Echo, and without fail, every conversation with Echo would extend precisely long enough for any discernible trail to vanish and for her pursuit to become utterly fruitless. Whether Echo's actions were born of a deliberate intent to shield Zeus or simply arose from her inherently sociable disposition, the ultimate consequence remained unequivocally the same: an undeniable obstruction of Hera's determined efforts to hold her husband accountable for his actions. The specific punishment Hera ultimately decreed for Echo was a precise reflection of her profound understanding of the unique problem Echo inadvertently represented. The core issue was not that Echo harbored malicious intent or engaged in deliberate deception. Indeed, she was likely quite sincere and well-meaning in her effusive conversational offerings. The true dilemma lay in the fact that her extraordinary gift for captivating discourse was being employed, whether consciously or unconsciously, to actively impede authentic, direct communication. Echo's conversational style was probably genuinely enchanting, brimming with unexpected intellectual connections and profound, thoughtful observations that rendered even the most familiar subjects seem fresh, novel, and eminently worthy of deep exploration. Precisely the kind of engrossing dialogue that causes one to utterly lose track of time, so thoroughly absorbed are they in the shared intellectual journey. Therefore, Hera's punitive curse was meticulously calibrated to address the specific nature of the transgression. Echo would indeed retain her melodious voice and her innate desire to communicate, but she would be stripped of the fundamental ability to initiate conversations or to articulate any original thoughts of her own. Her capacity for speech would be confined solely to responding to the utterances of others, and even then, only by echoing the concluding few words of their statements. This precise curse reveals a profound insight into Hera's sophisticated understanding of justice. Rather than simply imposing complete silence upon Echo or inflicting a punishment entirely unrelated to her actions, Hera opted for a consequence that maintained an intrinsic, logical link between the offense committed and the penalty exacted. Echo had inadvertently used the power of conversation to obscure or deflect from the truth, and thus she would be deprived of the capacity to lead or direct conversations while retaining the diminished ability to reflect and respond to them in a fragmented manner. This transformative punishment irrevocably altered Echo from an individual capable of controlling and guiding the flow of conversations into someone who became entirely dependent on others for both the content and the very direction of her communication. It also meant that her subsequent responses would frequently appear cryptic, disjointed, or incomplete, given her sole ability to reiterate mere fragments of what had been spoken to her. From Hera's perspective, this outcome likely seemed a fair and judicious resolution, one that effectively addressed the precise problem without entirely eradicating Echo's existence within her natural environment. Echo could still engage with the world around her, but she could no longer employ those interactions to interfere with other beings' attempts to discern what was genuinely transpiring. However, the punishment also served to illuminate the inherent complexity of adjudicating situations where individuals possess mixed motives or where genuinely good intentions inadvertently yield problematic and detrimental outcomes. Echo might have harbored a sincere affection for both Hera and Zeus, and her deepest desire could have been to prevent conflicts between them by offering soothing distraction and comfort to Hera, while simultaneously affording Zeus the crucial time to evade direct confrontation. From Echo's personal viewpoint, her conversational interventions might have been perceived as acts of peacemaking, an earnest endeavor to help all parties involved circumvent painful scenes and thereby preserve a fragile harmony. It is plausible that she had not fully considered the profound implication that deliberately avoiding difficult conversations can, in certain circumstances, exacerbate underlying problems rather than ameliorating them. There is also a poignant subtext within the narrative concerning the fundamentally different ways in which divine beings and mortal creatures experience the repercussions of their actions. For Hera, the meting out of Echo's punishment was likely viewed as but one minor incident within the larger, perpetual challenge of upholding divine order and enforcing accountability in a world constantly disrupted by her husband's capricious behavior. The story subtly suggests that Hera possessed a crucial understanding regarding the intricate relationship between communication and truth. It implies that even conversations undertaken with the best of intentions, if they consistently prevent individuals from directly confronting and addressing real, underlying problems, are ultimately not genuinely helpful, regardless of how enjoyable or temporarily comforting they might prove to be. But for Echo, the transformation was absolute and irreversible, profoundly impacting every single interaction she would experience for the remainder of her existence. The narrative does not cast Hera as inherently cruel or unjust in her decree, but it powerfully underscores how actions that appear entirely reasonable and justifiable from one perspective can unleash utterly devastating consequences when viewed from another. The punishment, harsh as it was, might have imparted to Echo a valuable, albeit painful, lesson about the crucial distinction between conversation that genuinely serves the needs of others and dialogue that, however charmingly delivered, ultimately functions to sidestep uncomfortable realities and difficult truths. Yet, this profound lesson came at the immense cost of losing the very natural gift that had been central to her identity and her unique way of engaging with the world around her, of relating to the world. As one gazes from this elevated marble vantage point, contemplating the ancient dramas that unfolded across the landscape below, a reflection might naturally arise concerning the contemporary dialogues occurring that encapsulate similar tensions between compassion and candor. These discussions often navigate the delicate balance of shielding individuals from harsh realities versus empowering them to confront necessary truths. Following the onset of her unique predicament, Echo was compelled to cultivate entirely novel methodologies for engaging within the communal fabric of her society. Her previous capacity to offer solace through extensive, meandering discussions or to impart perceptive observations that illuminated familiar objects from fresh perspectives had vanished. Consequently, she was obliged to forge meaning and cultivate interpersonal bonds through meticulous, active listening and judiciously articulated responses to the confidences shared by others. The profound question emerges: how does one judiciously reconcile the innate inclination to provide comfort and diversion with the solemn obligation to foster genuine and forthright communication, even when the unvarnished truth might prove unsettling for all parties involved? Shifting our focus from these profound inquiries into veracity and interpersonal exchange, let us conclude our nocturnal contemplation by embarking upon a leisurely exploration of classical Greek philosophical concepts surrounding youth and aesthetic perfection, examining the motivations behind their establishment of formalized customs for venerating and preserving these intrinsically ephemeral attributes. One finds oneself situated within the expansive courtyard of an Athenian gymnasium, most likely sometime during the 5th century BCE. The sheer scale of the environment is perhaps more extensive than initially anticipated. It is not merely a singular edifice, but rather an intricate complex encompassing dedicated areas for physical exertion, comprehensive bathing amenities, meticulously cultivated gardens, and sheltered promenades designed for social discourse and intellectual instruction. The nascent morning light filters gently through the verdant canopy of olive trees strategically positioned along the courtyard's periphery, creating an exquisite, ever-shifting tableau of luminous sunbeams and profound shadows dancing across the pristine, pale stone surfaces. Subtly, the listener discerns the hushed symphony of daily preparations, the measured gurgle of water being decanted into basins, the soft, rhythmic abrasion of strigils undergoing meticulous cleansing, and the low, resonant murmur of converging conversations as individuals gradually assemble for the commencement of the day's manifold activities. This hallowed precinct served as the crucible where young Hellenic men convened, not solely to rigorously train their physiques, but also to immerse themselves in what might be termed a veneration of youthful vigor and corporeal excellence. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that the Greeks themselves would have employed distinct terminology and possessed an understanding of this practice that could potentially astonish modern sensibilities. The daily regimen observed within the gymnasium inherently mirrored this profound philosophical perspective. Adolescent males would arrive with the dawn and initiate a preparatory phase that bordered on the ritualistic in its scrupulous attention to every minute detail. They would divest themselves of their quotidian garments and meticulously anoint their skin with olive oil, a practice undertaken not out of mere vanity, but rather because the oleaginous substance afforded essential protection against the sun's fervent rays and the biting wind during their outdoor athletic pursuits. Upon encountering the phrase, cult of youth and beauty, contemporary minds might instinctively conjure images of superficial self-admiration or an obsessive preoccupation with outward appearance. Yet, the Hellenic paradigm was far more intricate and, in numerous respects, considerably more pragmatic. They perceived physical pulchritude and youthful exuberance as potent manifestations of more profound intrinsic qualities: robust health, unwavering discipline, an exquisite congruence between the intellectual faculties and the physical form, and that profound species of self-respect that germinates from diligently tending to oneself with the same meticulous care one would lavish upon a prized horticultural creation. The very act of applying the olive oil was inherently a communal endeavor. Comrades would extend assistance to one another in reaching inaccessible regions of the body, and this communal ritual afforded valuable junctures for tranquil dialogue concerning the forthcoming day, shared anxieties, or philosophical conundrums that had arisen since their previous assembly. The diligent physical care was intrinsically interwoven with profound emotional and intellectual rapport. Subsequent to the oiling of their skin, the young men would dedicate a significant period to engaging in a diverse array of physical exercises: vigorous running, competitive wrestling, the art of discus throwing, and the precise practice of javelin hurling. Nevertheless, these athletic endeavors were not primarily driven by a competitive ethos. The overarching objective was to cultivate bodies that were inherently robust, exceptionally pliable, and exquisitely graceful, capable of navigating the world with an innate sense of self-assurance and effortless fluidity. One might observe a particular cohort meticulously practicing discus throwing within a secluded corner of the courtyard. Their focus is not fixated upon achieving maximal distance or pinpoint accuracy, but rather upon appreciating the inherent aesthetic beauty of the throwing motion itself. The elegant rotation of the torso, the seamless transference of weight from one foot to the other, the fluid, expansive arc of the arm as it gracefully releases the discus. Each subsequent throw is invariably succeeded by thoughtful deliberation and gentle, constructive critique, with paramount attention directed towards the pristine form and rhythmic cadence, rather than solely upon the quantifiable outcomes. This profound emphasis on elegant movement transcended the confines of formalized physical exercise. The young men would assiduously practice their deportment, including walking, sitting, and standing, in manners that eloquently conveyed self-assurance and dignified self-possession. They assiduously cultivated the ability to navigate complex social situations with the identical meticulous attention to form and rhythmic flow that they applied to their athletic endeavors. The Greeks firmly believed that the manner in which one physically presented oneself profoundly influenced one's cognitive processes and emotional landscape. An individual who moved with innate grace and acute self-awareness was considered more likely to engage in lucid thought and interact magnanimously with their peers. Physical discipline, in this context, served as an indispensable cornerstone for comprehensive intellectual and moral development. Following their rigorous exercise, the young men engaged in elaborate bathing rituals, which constituted a pivotal component of the Greek philosophical framework surrounding beauty and personal grooming. This intricate process commenced with the dexterous application of strigils, which were curved metallic implements meticulously employed to scrape away accumulated oil, perspiration, and detritus from the skin's surface. This was not merely a utilitarian act of cleansing, but rather a sophisticated form of dermatological care that rendered the body exquisitely smooth and vibrantly healthy. The scraping procedure was typically executed in pairs or intimate small groups, with companions extending mutual assistance to reach recalcitrant areas and meticulously ensuring that the cleansing was both comprehensive and gentle. Much like the communal oil application, this ritual fostered invaluable opportunities for hushed conversation and reciprocal care, thereby profoundly fortifying existing social bonds. The culminating phase involved the delicate application of fragrant oils and, on occasion, subtle cosmetic enhancements, employed not to dissimulate or fundamentally alter one's inherent physiognomy, but rather to accentuate and laud the natural pulchritude that had been meticulously revealed through diligent exercise and scrupulous cleansing. The ultimate aspiration was to embody the most refined version of oneself, radiating health, vitality, and an undeniable aura of meticulous self-care. Subsequent to the strigil cleansing, the participants immersed themselves in water of varying temperatures, initially warm, then refreshingly cool, occasionally culminating in a brief, invigorating plunge into frigid water, which left the skin luminously aglow and profoundly energized. These deliberate thermic fluctuations were widely believed to enhance circulatory function and bolster the body's intrinsic capacity to acclimate to mutable environmental conditions. However, the veneration of youthful vigor and aesthetic perfection extended far beyond these quotidian physical practices. The Greeks additionally instituted formalized religious and communal ceremonies specifically designed to commemorate the zenith of physical development and, concurrently, acknowledge its inherently transient nature. The methodology for selecting candidates for these esteemed ceremonial roles was approached with profound seriousness, necessitating scrupulous observation of prospective participants. Over time, the community sought not merely conventional physical attractiveness, but rather a constellation of deeper attributes, such as innate grace, unwavering emotional equilibrium, and that species of self-assurance that emanates from genuine self-respect, rather than from superficial vanity or unwarranted arrogance. Young men and women who comprehensively embodied the Hellenic ideals of beauty and corporeal flawlessness might be chosen to participate in sacred religious processions, carrying revered objects, or to assume leading roles in ceremonial dances. These distinguished roles not only honored individual physical allure, but also underscored the community's profound appreciation for the harmony and vitality that youth intrinsically symbolizes. Those privileged to be chosen for these roles understood implicitly that they were representing something far grander than their individual selves. They functioned as living embodiments of the community's cherished values concerning robust health, unwavering discipline, and the harmonious interrelationship between physical and spiritual evolution. Simultaneously, the Greeks harbored a profound awareness of the ephemeral nature of youth and physical beauty. Their celebrations of these qualities were perpetually imbued with an implicit acknowledgement that the relentless march of time irrevocably alters every individual, and that the ultimate objective was not to desperately cling to a youthful visage, but rather to judiciously harness the energy and self-confidence inherent in youth to cultivate enduring qualities of character and profound wisdom. This nuanced understanding engendered practices that might, to a modern observer, appear surprisingly progressive. Elder men who had themselves been celebrated for their beauty and youthful vigor were subsequently honored for their pivotal role in instructing younger generations on how to gracefully navigate the transition from relying upon physical attractiveness to cultivating deeper, more sustainable wellsprings of self-confidence and valuable social contribution. They firmly believed that an individual who had assiduously learned to appreciate and diligently care for their physical self during their formative years would be significantly better prepared to discover new sources of profound satisfaction and abiding self-respect as their corporeal form inevitably transformed over time. The rigorous discipline and meticulous attention to health assiduously cultivated within the gymnasium would serve them faithfully throughout the entire span of their lives, even as their outward appearance underwent its natural evolution. Greek lyrical poetry and visual artistry from this specific historical epoch eloquently reflect this intricate comprehension of beauty and the inexorable process of aging. Rather than perpetuating the illusion that youth endures perpetually, Hellenic artists celebrated the distinctive allure inherent in various life stages, the nascent energy of adolescence, the seasoned self-assurance of middle age, and the dignified sagacity of advanced years. The gymnasium, in this context, served as an organic crucible where these crucial intergenerational relationships could naturally flourish. Older men would generously impart their accumulated knowledge of refined exercise techniques, meticulous personal care practices, and sophisticated social graces to their younger counterparts, while the younger men, in turn, provided an invigorating surge of energy and boundless enthusiasm that kept the older men perpetually connected to the vibrant pulse of youth. As the evening gracefully descends and the gymnasium gradually surrenders to a profound stillness, one might discern how the late afternoon sun casts a resplendent golden luminescence upon the skin of the young men meticulously concluding their daily routines. There is an intrinsic, undeniable beauty emanating from bodies that have been assiduously cared for and rigorously exercised, from skin that is vibrantly healthy and immaculately clean, and from movements that are both self-assured and inherently graceful. Perhaps their profound approach offers valuable insights for those of us presently navigating our own complex relationships with the concepts of beauty, the process of aging, and the nuanced art of self-care. Taktana. Instead of perceiving the ephemeral qualities of youth and inherent beauty as treasures to fiercely grasp, one might instead consider them precious endowments to savor completely during their tenure, serving simultaneously as cornerstones for cultivating the self-mastery and personal esteem essential for navigating the extended odyssey of a truly fulfilling existence. There is, moreover, a profound serenity to be found in beholding such loveliness, unburdened by the apprehension of its eternal retention. The ancient Greeks, it appears, discovered a remarkable method for honoring corporeal flawlessness while embracing its transient character, choosing to dedicate efforts to well-being and outward presentation, yet without succumbing to desperation concerning senescence and the inevitable tides of transformation. As one might meander deliberately homeward amidst the twilight avenues of classical Athens, enveloped by the soft cadences of a metropolis drifting into slumber, a contemplative spirit might ponder the experience of inhabiting a society that lauded aesthetic grace, devoid of embarrassment, confronted the progression of years without despondency, and perceived corporeal upkeep as a bedrock for the enduring endeavor of evolving into one's most holistic and benevolent being. What daily practices, then, might guide us toward discovering that equilibrium between valuing the endowments of juvenescence and making ready for the distinct offerings that accompany seasoned insight, profound sagacity, and the more profound attractiveness that blossoms upon mastering the art of nurturing oneself and fellow beings through every epoch of a mortal existence. The directive to meticulously rephrase a given text, adhering strictly to a set of precise parameters, has been thoroughly comprehended. The expectation is to produce a rendition that mirrors the original's length and structural integrity, preserving its paragraphing and the logical sequence of ideas. Furthermore, the instructions mandate an expansion upon the inherent thoughts, incorporating illustrative details and pertinent examples to ensure the desired textual volume is achieved. The linguistic enrichment of the prose is a paramount consideration, necessitating the judicious employment of synonyms, a diverse array of grammatical constructions, and compelling expressive tools to cultivate a vibrant and engaging narrative, while assiduously avoiding any form of repetition or tautology. Maintaining unwavering factual and terminological consistency is crucial, meaning proper names, specialized terminology, numerical values, and all factual information are to remain entirely unaltered. The tone and stylistic essence of the original material, whether serious, casual, technical, or otherwise, must be faithfully replicated, with a particular emphasis on a journalistic narrative style. Crucially, the paraphrased text must unequivocally convey the core message and overarching purpose of the initial document, always maintaining a third-person perspective and remaining entirely in the original English language. However, it appears that the source text intended for this comprehensive rephrasing operation has not been provided, rendering the execution of these detailed instructions presently infeasible. To proceed with the requested task, the original content must first be furnished.